Transportation Plan. She is responsible for overseeing transportation alternative grants, applications, and awards. And she also manages KATE, the Kansas Active Transportation Enhancement Program, aimed at the implementation of active transportation infrastructure and programming in Kansas. And Tammy Sufi is a transportation planner and director of Tools Design Kansas City office. For more than 20 years, she has worked closely with communities to develop plans and policies that promote safe and reliable transportation choices for people of all backgrounds. She led the development of the Kansas Active Transportation Plan and currently supports a number of KDOT's active transportation initiatives. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jenny and Tammy.
All right, thank you, Peyton. I think I'm going to get started and we'll kind of pass it back and forth once or twice. But thank you for joining. We're always excited to share more about the work we're doing and specifically about the Active Transportation Plan and what's included. Hopefully what you learned today, you'll be able to share in the communities you work with. Next slide. All right, just first want to introduce our team. So if you haven't met us yet, Matt Messina, he is the Bureau Chief for Multimodal Transportation. And then to the right is Ann Catt. She is our Safe Routes to School Program Coordinator. So that's a newer position that we added on, I think, last July. Next slide. And then we have our consultant support, which, you know, there's a lot of faces here. And these folks, they can come on and off, like depending on what projects we're working on. But Tammy is our main consultant. She helps manage all of that support. And then we have a main Burns and McDonnell consultant who helps a lot with engineering support, program or project management. Next slide. Okay, so just briefly, I want to talk about how the Active Transportation Plan came to be. In 2020, we were awarded state funding for multimodal transportation, and that included active transportation. So we get about $2 million per year for that. And it's really allowed a lot of flexibility, a lot of new opportunities. And that included the Active Transportation Plan. So that was one of the first things we kicked off with that funding, because the last plan we had was in 1995. So it definitely needed to be updated. But we've also been able to put funding towards KDOT projects, like through IKE. We have our the transportation plan, 10-year plan. So there's a lot of projects in the pipeline for that, as well as a lot of other KDOT projects like connecting links, just basic mill and overlay projects, heavy preservation types of projects. And when we hear that any of these projects have the potential to add a pedestrian facility, such as a side path, or like a wider shoulder if it's on the US bike route, we do get involved early when we hear about it and add funds if needed in order to get that facility put in. So if you're ever aware of a KDOT project coming where your community has asked for say a better connection to transit, or just a better route out to a community college, or like whatever it is, reach out, get involved early. Like if you get involved early, like in the surveying and design, oftentimes we can get that facility added if there's enough space and time to do that. Next slide. Okay, and just wanted to also share that that state funding is what made hiring our consultants possible to help support the many efforts that we have been talking about for years. And our next big project is working on a complete streets policy for KDOT. So Tammy and her team will be, and Burns and McDonnell will be helping with that. A big thing right now is our transportation alternatives grant program, that for the first time we have dedicated engineering support to help, especially the smaller communities with that application process. And perfect. So I think now I'm going to provide a brief overview and then hand it over to Tammy to get into the nuts and bolts of some of that, the planning process and the toolkits. So she'll start with the active transportation plan, kind of how that all went down. A couple of the amazing toolkits we have available that are very user friendly, help to support our work and promote it across the state. Our Safe Routes to School program, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and then also the road safety assessment trainings that, if you're not familiar with, it's actually co-led with LTAP through KU. All right, Tammy, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. So I'm going to talk about the plan, as Jenny said. And again, thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity to make sure as many people as possible know about the active transportation plan and all the resources that are in there. So when we started updating the plan a few years ago, the most recent plan had been published in 1995. And I think the cover kind of just says how dated that had gotten, although I do really appreciate that everybody is in their work clothing, it looks like. So it was very much focused on active transportation, not just recreation. So we worked really closely with community members all over the state. When we started developing the plan, we began working with a technical advisory committee at KDOT, and then we also worked with a core team of stakeholders. The whole process took about 2 years, and COVID hit just like right at the beginning of the plan. So we did a lot of online engagement, including 9 public workshops, 10 focus groups. We had online open houses. And again, we worked with our committees, and then we solicited a lot of feedback through community survey and other methods. So we do feel that we got a really great range of thoughts and opinions about active transportation and some of the concerns that people had. I do want to point out that the plan is a policy plan. So there's not a map in the plan that shows what the network of bike and pedestrian facilities is. It seemed really important for this sort of first plan in a long time, in almost 30 years, to really focus on the policies that could help KDOT and communities across the state move forward for active transportation. So you can see some of that here just in the table of contents that it explains everything that's included in the plan, but we really focused on those kind of policy strategies. So we set a vision that Kansas will be a place where people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds have safe and convenient options to walk, bike, roll, and use other active modes for transportation and recreation. And then we have a series of kind of guiding principles and goals that support that vision. And I won't read each one of these, but the focus areas are safety, equity, mobility, community health and vibrancy, culture shift in education, and system longevity. And I thought it might be helpful we're not going to go into all the goals. There's about 6 pages of goals and their related recommendations in the plan. So I encourage you to take a look at the plan. But I did want to just pull out a couple key things that I think in particular relate back to rural communities. We did hear from the public quite a bit that there were the same kinds of issues kept coming up in rural areas. And those would be things like, a highway that served as a barrier between kind of the main part of town and, say, a Walmart or other location where you could get food. So that issue seemed to come up over and over again. We also heard about just feeling like rural communities had fewer resources, especially when it came to competing with more urban and suburban communities for transportation funding related to active transportation. So we tried to address as many of those concerns as we could in the plan. And so I did want to point out that one of the recommendations under equity is to begin having dedicated funding and technical assistance for active transportation infrastructure and to provide support in underserved and rural communities. And we're going to talk about a couple of those things. And then on the safety side, overall, there's an effort across all types of communities to use a more data-driven approach to targeting safety improvements, particularly for vulnerable road users. And I think maybe Peyton, you could confirm, but I think we're going to probably get these slides out to everybody afterwards. So these are links here in the document that you'll receive that will take you to the vulnerable road user safety assessment, this guide that's shown here on crossing guidance and guide to crosswalk countermeasures. So some really great tools that aren't all necessarily developed as part of the active transportation plan, but we refer to those throughout the plan. On the mobility side of the recommendations, really looking at developing accessible, connected, comfortable networks. And again, addressing those gaps and barriers, be they a bridge or a highway or any other sort of barrier, really trying to help communities find ways to focus on those, on overcoming those barriers. And then we also heard throughout the process that folks wanted more opportunities to kind of leverage placemaking to attract people to their communities. So we're going to talk about a couple of resources that we have related to active tourism and those sorts of things as well. Jenny, I think I'm going to hand it back to you on this transportation alternatives piece. And then I'll jump back in on the toolkits if that's all right.
Okay, yeah, that little sneaky slide in here.
Yes.
Out of order. Okay, yeah, I mentioned the transportation alternatives and how Tool is helping us provide that a little greater level of technical support. That is in large response to rural communities who maybe have 1 or 2 staff members and can really struggle with applying for a federal grant in the manner that's required to demonstrate an understanding of the project. So we have that technical support, and then we've also this round for the first time have PE or the design of the project participating. That's another expense that can be just out of reach for a lot of smaller communities with lower resources. We are able to provide match support, the full 20% match support on TA this round using the Highway Safety Improvement Program funding, and that came about because I'm going to talk about this in a little bit later, but like the vulnerable road user assessment was published last year. And there's an expectation that states apply some of their HSIP or Highway Safety Improvement Program funding towards vulnerable road users. So TA is a natural fit for that funding. So we are also providing match support, which again is another thing that makes TA out of reach for many smaller communities. We have an online application, which is just good for everybody, and especially for me, where things are just automatically generated into a spreadsheet, a lot easier for organization, hopefully quicker review. We have our Safe versus School program, which I'll talk about in a little more detail later, but that is reimbursed at 100%. So if you know of communities that don't have a Safe versus School plan in place yet, definitely start talking to them about getting one. Especially for smaller communities, this can mean a community-wide plan in many cases, because routes to school are often just great neighborhood links. They could connect to downtown sometimes. And, you know, if your whole town is half mile, 1 mile, then they can be a great asset. And it's, I think, the only funding we have available to fund actual community planning. So get on board with that. And maybe it's back to you, Tammy.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that slide was a little bit out of order, but I do think it is, you know, that Jenny talked about some great resources for rural and smaller communities. And one of the things that really became clear in active transportation planning process is that those resources are needed on the community side, but also on the KDOT side. So one of the things we heard from our technical advisory committee is that they often didn't have the information that they might need to really assess whether or not a particular route that they may be working on for other reasons was part of the active transportation plan or desires in a community. So we're really encouraging communities to develop active transportation and just transportation plans in general. And so one of the resources that we put together was an active transportation planning toolkit. I'm going to talk about that in just slightly more detail. And then I'm also going to talk about the active tourism toolkit. And those are both available online, and we'll get those links to you as well. So the active transportation planning toolkit, just like it sounds, it focuses on small and mid-sized communities. And the idea was that it would really kind of serve as like a do-it-yourself guide to planning. So really just helping communities understand at a minimum, what are the things that you might want to do to put together even just a very simple network of where you would like to see walking and biking improvements. And so there's some details in this plan. I'm not going to go into all of them, but it does kind of take you through those basic steps of how to create your plan. It does call out specific places where you might want to get some technical support on the engineering side, but a lot of this can be done by almost anybody in the community. And so we're encouraging folks to do that. The plan itself includes many tools, including sample surveys, a press release template, kind of social media guidance, flyer templates. So some really great things that are just plug and play, ready to go for your community. They just need a little tiny bit of tailoring. And then we also put together a very simple mapping tool. This actually takes you step by step through how to create maps for your community, just using Google Maps and PowerPoint and the drawing functions in there. So it's really very straightforward and simple. And then there's also a template for just the entire plan itself so that you can, again, just kind of plug in your town name. Obviously, you're going to tailor your maps and your recommendations, but it really does give you many of the pieces of that whole process to help support you. And so that's linked here on this slide. And again, we'll get these slides out to everybody so you have easy access to those tools. And as you can see here, it just kind of takes you through the different sections, just as any other plan would include, kind of, what your process was, your vision and goals, identifying those key issues and gaps, the recommendations, prioritization, and then there's a fairly extensive section on how to maintain and implement your plan, which we're hoping will really help communities think long-term and kind of about overall system longevity. We also included an active tourism toolkit. So this focuses really more on kind of the economic development side and gives some great examples from Kansas communities. This is Humboldt, Kansas, where they've really leveraged the local trail, camping or glamping, and all sorts of other things that have really been very community driven and very successful. But there's a lot of tips in this active tourism plan talking about just nationally some best practices, how to get things started, how to understand the potential market, and then how to promote any sort of experience or local resources that you have in your community that might help drive some economic development. So we encourage you to check that out as well. Okay, with that, I think I'm handing it back over to Jenny to talk about some other things happening with the KATE program.
All right, thanks. I feel like almost like I need to slow down because it's so early still. I think we're wrapping up. But plenty of time for questions, which hopefully y'all have been thinking about. Maybe any questions you might have in these next slides might generate more. So as part of our active transportation plan rollout, we decided, along with talking to our communications team at KDOT, that we wouldn't just do a one and done press release and let it end there. Like, we wanted a very long, drawn out release of the plan. We'd worked I think almost 3 years. We worked on developing the plan, and so we just didn't want it to kind of go out there and then be forgotten about. So we had an extended promotion through what we called the Walk, Bike, Roll Kansas virtual series, which in 2023 culminated in an in-person summit. But then we continued those virtual the webinars through the end of the year. And then this year in 2024, we're continuing that every other month now. So we pick topics specific to what we've heard from communities, which is captured in the active transportation plan. And then also just the strategies and action items in the plan. So it is a way to begin and continue the implementation of the plan. If you were able to attend any of these, thank you for participating. If you weren't, no problem. You go and click on the recording, watch it as if you're there. The slides, the Q&A are also available for every one of our webinars. And then you can even go to the Walk Bike Roll Kansas webpage and check out who spoke, find the slides, that type of thing. So just wanted to then also plug our next webinar. You can, I think when you have these slides, this will be a live link. But you can also, if you just Google Kansas Active Transportation Plan, if you haven't already found that webpage, this is all on that webpage, and you can go and register right now for the next webinar, which is telling your story, how to leverage storytelling to build project support and momentum. So and there is a press release coming out on this through KDOT too, I think next week. But what we've learned is our communities are really good at building projects, even doing some planning work and having their committees but then like something will get constructed or like some program is initiated, and then we don't hear about it again. And it's hard to know like what's going on in the state and to have great highlight examples out there and really lift them up so that other communities can be inspired. So very much lacking in that area, and that is what this webinar is about. It's hopefully helping communities to be better at bragging about their accomplishments, and I know bragging can be really hard for Kansans, but it just recognizing how important it is to lift other communities up and just accomplish more, do more in Kansas, so that people don't feel like they're alone in this work. Next slide. Okay, and then just some awareness tools. These are also all on the Active Transportation Plan and for your use. So if you say have a city council who needs convincing about prioritizing walking and biking in your community, then this video series is a great place to start. They're quick videos. I think 2 minutes is the longest. You can play these videos. We try to capture a diversity of users in areas of the state. And so whatever is relevant for your audience, you can choose one of these. They are public access. So definitely take advantage of that. We also have our Kansas Active Transportation Plan and Policy Registry. We have entered like all of the plans and policies that we're aware of into this registry, and they show up on this map. So you can click on your county when you go here, and this link is on the Active Transportation Plan page. You can click on the county and see all the plans and policies that have been published to date. If you go to a county and you're like, I know they have this one plan, then just let me know or send it to me and we'll get it uploaded. The focus really is on active transportation plans and policies. So you can see what's out there. And if you want examples from other communities, that's a great place to start. So Safe Routes to School, I mentioned I was going to talk about this a little bit more. Today, it's hot off the press, released the next call for applications for developing a plan in your community. So it's not due till May 3rd, so almost a whole month to get an application in. They are very simple applications. And if awarded, the community will, what you'll receive is consultants basically coming into your community, working with your community to develop your Safe Routes to School plan. That plan can then be used to get funding for education, encouragement activities, and construction, like construction of sidewalks, crossings, that type of thing. It makes any community a lot more competitive for any funding that you might seek after that, whether it be transportation alternatives or cost share or a federal grant, local grants, anything. So that's the link. You can go there and there's a Q&A and slides that kind of go over exactly what will be required. And then there's also a webinar that you'll be able to register for. if you want more information. Next slide. Okay, and then I mentioned the road safety assessment trainings. So this is new this year. This stemmed from the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a required kind of planning process KDOT does every year. And we are moving towards a drive to zero and safe system approach moving forward. But so we had our pedestrian and bicycle emphasis area team, and one of our main action items was developing and conducting these road safety assessment trainings. So we contracted with KU LTAP Center and to develop these, just launched in March, and we've had what, 4 trainings so far. They get better every time as our trainers get more familiar with the material, and large or small, like these getting outside and doing these assessments has been a great experience. I was just at the Garden City one. We had, I think, 6 participants and just great discussions. We went on site to a couple of intersections. We're able to discuss like what the issues, the safety issues were, what were some potential solutions. That we had some consultants there that are working directly with the city, and so that information will be able to then be used by the city to help identify some possible countermeasures to make the area safer. So if you haven't already, register. It's on site, lunch is free, the training's free. So definitely encourage it. You still have 4 options, and then we are planning to have them for the next 2 years too. So get on board with that. Okay, and then other resources. I mentioned the vulnerable road user safety assessment. This was such a valuable exercise. Like we have our crash report from the Active Transportation Plan. The vulnerable road user safety assessment is that crash report, but expanded tenfold, I'd say. So go check it out. It was able to really identify what roads are higher risk or high risk for injury or fatalities, even where accidents or crashes haven't occurred yet. And, you know, for instance, like 4-lane undivided like roads versus like a 2-lane with a 2-way turning lane. You can go and look at the countermeasures, like what's recommended. Before long, we will have a vulnerable road user priority corridor map available, so you can look up your locations and see what your community looks like in terms of risk to vulnerable road users. We were able to use this map because we do have access to it right now as internal staff, but to determine eligibility for that match on the transportation alternatives. We also have our KDOT crosswalk guide. This is based off the FHWA, or Federal Highway Administration Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian guide. But this, you know, we kind of built out more, and KDOT approved it for availability for KDOT engineers as well as communities. This especially targets like mid-block crossings and links to suggested countermeasures for any crossing concern you might have on specific roadways. We have a very broad list of active transportation resources that you can access, from design guidelines to equity and more. And then we have our funding opportunities for active transportation webpage as well, where I try to keep that up to date. And, you know, for instance, there's a federal grant available right now, or a call for projects open specifically for active transportation projects. Next slide. All right, so that wraps that up, and I think we have plenty of time now for questions.
Thank you both so much. We appreciate you coming to talk with us. Does anyone have any questions? I know we have a few prepared, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance if they have questions. Okay, then I'll kick off with some questions if that's okay. During the engagement process, where were the participants mostly from? Was it more urban like engagement, or were there a mix of rural people involved as well?
Do you want me to answer that one, Jenny?
Sure, if you have it available.
Yeah. So we did district-based, our intention even before COVID was to do district-based engagement. We did want to make sure that we were understanding statewide issues overall, but also honing in on any differences that might be regional, or as you're, asking, like making sure we were understanding rural versus larger community issues. So we did have those district-based meetings, and then we had I believe, two extra meetings to cover, just to really make sure we were covering Wichita and Kansas City area. So we did hear, I don't have the numbers completely broken down, but just I think by virtue of doing those district-based meetings, we did really get a good cross-section of hearing about rural needs versus urban needs, and tried to pay attention to that as we were writing the plan and make sure it wasn't just an urban focused or suburban focused plan.
When compared to urban and rural areas, or like when compared to urban areas, rural areas are sparsely dense and car dependent. Are there any specific strategies or best practices to address these challenges and encourage active transportation?
Well, I know, Tammy, you brought up some of the things specific in the plan about that. But I don't know that I would, like, when I think about rural areas, and I know like car dependency is definitely a thing. Like when you you can't really leave the town very easily without being in a car. Like oftentimes grocery stores are in the next town, or even like the schools. But in other ways, they're some of the most walkable, bikeable places out there. And when I would visit different smaller communities, say like Peabody, or there'll be like sidewalks and close proximity of some critical services, and retail areas like the Main Street, and the community center and the senior center and the recreation areas are all very close together. And in some cases there's even sidewalks, or if it's very rural, like sometimes sidewalks aren't even necessary. But even small towns appreciate having sidewalks, getting off the road. Like I would say the biggest need is encouragement locally, like encouraging people to use the facilities, to get out walking, to understand the physical health benefit, the mental health benefit, the aging in place benefit. Sometimes people don't, that doesn't get actualized until, say, someone loses their license, because for visual reasons, and suddenly they feel homebound. But if the culture becomes more of promoting walking and biking, to just go to get basic amenities, then suddenly that person hasn't lost their freedom. They have the freedom to walk and bike safely to where they need to go, to be out with people and engaging with other people. But there's so much work to do about changing that culture. And so that's why, like, we have our Safe versus School, like, encouragement kind of programming dollars and whatnot. But really just, working with your public health folks to make it not like, oh, why is that person walking? Did they lose their driver's license? Did they get a DUI? Their car is broken down. I should ask if they need a ride. You just go 1 block, 2 blocks, half a mile. Like, it's just, how do we change that culture to normalize walking? Humble. I know, like, I'll visit my friend in Humble, and I go out there and I'll walk to the grocery store, which is a 1/4 mile, and it's just, I'm the only one out walking. I feel like this oddball person out there. And so like that's a big part. And it will be working with public health and just making it something that's promoted. Sometimes it requires creating walking groups or walking school buses in terms of schools or school, the bike trains are a new thing, like starting to pop up in Kansas anyway, where you'll have like we have funds to do a paid coordinator just for maybe a couple hours a week to help lead a group of kids on bikes if parents aren't comfortable with them going without someone leading it.
Did you notice that there was a big difference in perception about those benefits when you were working with rural folks and urban folks in engagement, or was that kind of the stigma around those things, was that kind of similar across the board during the planning process?
I definitely say like urban is maybe better at accepting walking and biking for transportation than rural, especially if they've come from areas where that was more normalized. Like bike share can help with that. I know I was just in Ellsworth, stopped in Ellsworth to look at a project recently constructed, and they have bike share, and they just built a side path. And but yeah, like what I'd like to know is like, are people actually walking on the paths and biking? So like our job, like our role is to build these things too, like to get them out there, because you can't use them if they're not there. But then there's just as much, if not more, work just to change that stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be out in the ball fields practicing like tons of physical activity with the kids, like but then when it comes to just fitting in physical activity, which is again so universally great for your health and holistically, like it's just not as accepted.
Yeah, and then I would just add to that we do see slightly different issues in rural areas, just as far as like, I think even just like this photograph that's shown, like, it's very typical to have, maybe it's a very low volume roadway, but the speeds are typically set higher and the roadway is narrow, there's no shoulder. So, for an adult bicycling with lots of experience, that's probably, comfortable and, fairly safe. But for a kid going to school, for example, and trying to cross that roadway, what types of improvements do we want to have? And for places where there aren't sidewalks, we're learning a lot through this first round of Safe Routes to School program or Safe Routes to School planning grants that we're in the middle of right now. Of just there's some opportunities to make improvements, but that certainly the environment is a little bit different, and with such low population, we need to just find the right appropriate measure to provide safety, but not overbuild the infrastructure that's really costly. And there's some good resources out there that this group may already be aware of, like the FHWA Rural Guide. But some of those countermeasures or some of those opportunities for, say, a walkable shoulder, things like that, we want to think about those really carefully when it comes to students in particular. So there are definitely some challenges that we don't see as much in the urban and suburban areas. So we look forward to kind of working with communities to figure out those solutions.
And I did want to point out too, like probably what I hear more than anything is related to highway crossings. So like the school being on the wrong side of the street, or like everything was on this side of the town, but then all of a sudden now there's like a housing development on the other side of the highway. Kids are crossing, they're having to use gaps to get across, or high school kids going to the gas station, which is on the other side of the highway. So probably that's my most common question. And usually it's in these smaller towns that's happening. So that crosswalk guide is helpful. The FHWA step guide is helpful. Transportation alternatives, cost share are areas where we could look to find the best solution and get something in there. If you're dealing with anything on, every community has the opportunity to apply for like a traffic study, like especially it's more geared towards smaller communities that don't have engineering support on hand already, or the the resources to like hire an engineer. If you go to KDOT local projects, I could even drop it in the chat, but like it's called a TEEP study. It's a very simple application of the area of concern. You enter it, and then like if it is deemed an eligible kind of area and needed in terms of not having the resources to do it yourself, then it's free. KDOT sends in engineers to go and study the area. If it's on a state system, it just has to get approval through our transportation. I can't, one of our departments who does like the highway stuff and crossings just approves it, and then that can also be studied too.
Cool, thank you.
That and like the Dollar General, like a half a mile or a mile outside of town without a sidewalk, like that's the second most common inquiry. And just getting that sidewalk, any community can go, like even if it's on a state system, sometimes if it's only half a mile and it's a very small community, you could, like that community can, put it might be cheaper for them to do it themselves. You just have to like come up with whatever plan you want to do, like with the sidewalk, and get a permit from the district KDOT office to actually put that sidewalk in. So like Dighton just did that. Like they applied for TA. We were going to work with them on a non-federal funding, but in the meantime, they're like, we just need a sidewalk. They got the permit, put in the sidewalk. Now they have a sidewalk to Dollar General. They were able to use local supplies, resources, workforce, and probably did it for 1/10 of the cost and like way shorter time period too. It can take a couple years working through the KDOT letting process, just FYI.
I think that's a really good example of like a community coming together to get something done that they want, which I think is in the spirit of active travel. So that's really cool. Does anyone have any other questions? I know I took up a lot of that time, sorry. But I want to make sure other people have questions answered if they would like. Okay. Well, as I don't see any questions in the chat either, I think I'm going to adjourn this meeting. But I appreciate both of you coming to speak with us. This was a great presentation, and I'm sure it provided a lot of useful information for our participants. And as they said, I will send out the presentation for you all to have reference to later on. And this recording will be posted on our YouTube page for everyone to refer back to later. So thank you both, Tammy and Jenny, for speaking with us today. Yeah, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I just dropped in the chat the link to all of everything that's happening with the Kansas Active Transportation Program. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good weekend.
You too.